Hello guys, this is Paul McWhorter with TopTechBoy.com, and we're here today with episode number 1 in our incredible new tutorial series where you are going to build the ultimate GPS tracker. Sound good? I hope it does. Well, what I'm going to need you to do is pour yourself a nice tall glass of ice cold coffee. That would be straight up black coffee poured over ice, no sugar, no sweeteners, none needed. And then what I'm going to need you to do is go ahead and get out the gear that I warned you that you needed to order for this class. What? You haven't ordered it yet? Let me give you a quick catch up in case you missed last week's lesson about the gear that we will be using in this class. And I'll kind of give you a heads up here. This is the project that I have right now that I'm going to be teaching you to build. And then we'll get to this point and then we'll go further. But you can see what we have here is we're using a Raspberry Pi Pico W. We are using the Adafruit Ultimate GPS module version 3. We're using an SSD 1306 OLED display, a couple of buttons, and then a Breadvolt battery bank to power the project. Okay, and you can see that I've got this thing up and running already. It is feeding me GPS data and all that kind of good stuff. And so this is the direction that we're going. But what we're going to be talking about today is that this Adafruit GPS breakout board does not come with the pins soldered in. And so what I got to do is I got to teach you how to solder. Now, I'm kind of dreading this for several reasons. The first reason is I'm not the world's greatest solderer. I solder about as well as I weld. In other words, it works, but it's not very pretty usually, okay? And that's kind of where I am with soldering. I do it well enough to get the job done, but I'm not like expert and do absolutely beautiful work, okay? The second reason I dread it is soldering is one of those areas where there are purists out there, and I'm sure with me soldering on a YouTube video, I'm just going to get ripped to shreds by these guys that are very purist. And no matter how careful I am, or no matter how many things I try to tell you, it's going to be inadequate, okay? But if you just want to get the pins on this GPS board and move forward in the project, I will be able to show you enough where you will be able to do that. Now, if you don't have your gear, I'll give you real quick here. Go to the most excellent www.toptechboy.com. Use this magic little tool here, this happy little search tool, and search on something like getting geared up for the ultimate GPS tracker with Raspberry Pi Pico W. You come down here and I have Amazon links to all the components that I will be using in this project. I am hoping that most of you guys have pretty much everything on this list already, except for the Adafruit Ultimate GPS. And so you will need to order that. This takes you to Amazon. You can see here it is. It's $29. And you see that on this board, the header pins come with it, but they're not soldered in. So that is what we are going to learn how to do today. All right, well, let me come over here and let's see if we can jump in and start talking about soldering. First of all, if you really want to understand soldering, you need to take a class and you need to learn from the experts and all of that. But I really can't talk about soldering until I start by talking about the issue of the very important issue of safety. Okay, we have to take a second and talk about safety. All right, because most of the things we do on this channel, you really couldn't hurt yourself unless you were really trying, but you can hurt yourself if you're soldering, and so we really have to understand that. The first thing that's very important is don't burn yourself. Don't burn yourself, okay? What do I mean by not burning yourself? This is the soldering iron. This one, since I'm going to be soldering, it's already on. You have to hold it back here on the black part. What is people's natural tendency? People's natural tendency is to hold it like a pencil up here. I have seen people pick this up as a pencil and they have really burned themselves. So make sure before you turn your soldering iron on, practice and get very comfortable in how you're going to hold it. Also, that's kind of why I like the kit that you guys ordered was not exactly this one. I use this one, which is a much more expensive, even though it looks like it's kind of falling apart there, a lot more expensive unit. But yours has this stand, and when you put it in the stand, it always encourages you to pick it up here. Those that you put on the table, it's very easy to pick it up like a pencil. And so this little stand helps you be careful to not burn yourself. So just a couple of things on burning yourself. You know, you don't pick it up like a pencil. You've just got to be very mindful to not at all touch that, because it is very, very hot. Now, the second thing after don't burn yourself, you want to don't put your eye out. Okay, it is possible you're dealing with molten metal, and it is possible for that metal to splatter, like maybe you drop a drop on the desk and some splatters up and gets in your eye. You do not want to burn your eyes, and so what you want to do is you want to wear safety glasses. Okay, so what do we say? Never solder without your safety glasses on. Okay, you don't want to put your eye out. You want to wear your safety glasses. And I gave links to some safety glasses in the in that page on the website of the gear. So make sure you get your safety glasses. All right. Number 3, don't breathe the fumes. Don't breathe the fumes. Okay, and solder has a very distinct smell, and if you're smelling that distinct smell, it doesn't smell bad, but it's like it's a very distinct smell. If you're smelling it, you're not getting enough air circulation. So I've got a fan back over my shoulder, and that fan is blowing over my work area, and I have these huge 8-foot doors over here, and they're open, and so this is completely aired out. But as you're soldering, don't breathe the fumes, because there's all types of stuff in those fumes that you don't want to be breathing. And then on safety number 4, I will tell you, don't burn down the shop. Okay, how do you burn down the shop? One is you get busy with your soldering iron, and you set it down on the table, and you forget that you've left it on. Okay, you forget that you've left it on. Or another way that you can burn things down, you put it back in the proper place, but you forget to turn the soldering iron off, and then what happens is something blows over or falls over and touches the soldering iron. And this thing, while they call it a soldering iron, it is a fire starter. It is a house burner downer. And so guys, if you are teenagers, you want to make sure that you use the soldering gun with adult supervision. You don't want to just jump in and do this on your own. Okay, now the other part of don't burn down the shop, make sure that you turn your soldering iron off. Now, some of the soldering irons don't have like a big flashing light warning you that they're on. It is very easy to get distracted and walk off and leave your soldering iron on. That is asking for an accident, that somebody would come and touch it and burn themselves, or it's asking for a fire to be started. And so these are the big ones. If you guys have additional ones you want to share, leave them in the comments down below. But these are kind of the basics for simple solder jobs. How to do it what? Safely. How to do it safely. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with just kind of showing you on paper what we're trying to do, and then I'll go in and try to do some soldering for you here. Okay. First of all, the first thing that I should say is, how do you really want to solder? Well, what we have is we have a board here, and I'm going to kind of show you. You're looking at the board in cross section. Okay, you're looking at the board in cross section. Okay, and so there's a hole in the board, and then what you are going to have is you are going to have a pin that is going to come up through that hole about like this. Okay, and I did not draw that as well as I would have liked to, so I'm going to try it again. So you're going to have a pin that is going to come up and is going to kind of be like this. And there's a little gap between the pin and the hole. Okay, there's a little gap between the pin and the hole. And then let's say this is your soldering gun, your soldering iron. Now, And I'm going to get a piece of solder here. And I want you to see that for demonstration, I'm using this as my solder. I'm using this as my soldering iron so that I don't end up burning myself using the real one as I'm talking. Now, what you might be tempted to do is come in and touch that soldering iron with your solder and then get all that solder all melted on your pen. But the problem is if you get the solder melted on the tip of the soldering iron, it wants to stay there. It doesn't want to go and get where you need it, which is between that pin and that hole. And so this is the preferred way to do it. So here is my soldering iron tip. We're going to bring it in over here like this. And then what you want to do is you want to touch both the pin, and there is a little ring here. Let me see if I can draw this little ring. There's a little metal ring that goes around the hole. And if you look at the pictures, you'll see the little metal ring that is around the hole. And I've drawn that in green. So when I bring this pin in, I want to touch, when I bring the soldering tip in, I want to touch the pin that I'm soldering. I want to touch the pin that I'm soldering, and I also want to touch that metal ring. Now what you do is you bring your solder in over on this side. This is kind of like your solder wire coming in here, and you bring it in here, and the soldering iron heats up the pin and it heats up the ring. That will melt the solder, and then the solder will just kind of run all around here, and then you pick the soldering iron up off of it. And then in an ideal case, you should end up with, I'll kind of show you, the ideal solder joint to me looks like a Hershey Kiss. Okay, it looks like a Hershey Kiss. Now what do I mean by that? Okay, let me draw this again. What I mean is that I like my solder to look something like this. So something like that, that looks like a Hershey Kiss. And it's wider at the bottom, and then it is narrow at the top. And so I'm having trouble drawing it, but I want it to look something like this. Okay, like a Hershey Kiss. Now there are other things that you can do, and I'll show you two things that are not good, and these are the ones that you want to avoid. And I really wish that I could draw better. Okay, I really wish that I could draw better, but we're going to come up like this. Okay, now if your solder looks like this and doesn't make a kiss but makes a round ball, that is not good. That's very bad. And this is usually what you get if you come in and just put the solder on the soldering iron and then you try to scrape it off. You get something great big. You get a lot of solder on there, but the problem is you're not really adhering it to the ring. Okay, the other thing that can happen that isn't really good is one that looks like this. Okay, and we'll put this in here again. Okay, and it looks like this. You just kind of come up like this, and you just have not enough solder. So this is not enough solder, this is too much solder, and this is just about right. And when I go over there, I'm going to try to show you some close-ups, and you can see what I consider to be good solder joints and what I consider to be bad solder joints. Now, I will be honest with you, I find it really hard to do what I just set up here. I put the tip down, and then I'm finding that the solder doesn't melt. And so what I do is I put the tip down, it is touching the pin, it's touching that metal ring, I kind of count to 3, and if this hasn't started melting, I cheat just a little bit and I bring it over to the side and just barely touch the tip of the soldering iron and then pull it back, and then that gets the melting started. Now the purist will say you can't do that, but sometimes I sit there and the solder doesn't melt and I start singeing my board waiting for the solder to melt, and I think I got to do something, so I just cheat a little bit, but I'm primarily touching the pin and the metal ring, and I just barely kind of go over and touch the iron just a little bit to get things started. And maybe you can see it as I'm doing that. And you guys that are able to melt it just by touching the pin and just by touching the ring, you guys leave comments down below what the secret of your success is. But I have not found that success myself. Okay, so that is the stuff that we're going to be doing there. It is, what are we going for? We are going for something that looks like a Hershey Kiss. All right, so as you might imagine, I already soldered this one up, right? Because why? Because I needed to go ahead with the project. And so let's look at my solder job and let's see how I did. Okay, so I'm going to kind of critique my work here. Now, these are absolutely beautiful solder joints, but I didn't do those. Those came soldered. These are mine. Okay, and so let's look at this first one here. Let me see, how do I want to point at it. What's over here? Okay, this one on the 3.3 volts, I am kind of proud of that one. Do you see how that looks like a Hershey Kiss? That one I think is pretty good. Now, if you look from the top, you can see that I singed the board just a little bit, but not too bad. And that really, I would say, is kind of, for my skill level, that's sort of what I'm going for, that one. This one, you can see, is a little bit of a Hershey Kiss, but I got too much solder on it. And then if you look right here, I kind of pulled it off and left a little bit of a tail. And so it's a little bit more solder than I want, and I left a tail. Okay, this third one looks kind of like a Hershey Kiss, but this third one, I kind of burned the board a little bit, so that's not perfectly. Let's look at this fourth one on the fixed pin. And what you can see is that really looks like a Hershey Kiss, and I didn't burn the board. And so this one, out of these four, this is the best one, and this would be kind of, for me, a really good one, and this is what I'm going for. This one looks like a Hershey Kiss, but again, you can see I left a little tail on it. I like it, but I don't like the tail. And then also this is not burnt, so that's good. And this one is really, what I would say here is this is like way too much. This is like that round one. And this actually, I don't think might be a real, this is probably not a very good connection here, because you see it stuck up here and it globbed up, but it didn't really adhere to the ring well. Now, if you look at these three, you can see I singed the board pretty bad, like I burned the board, and that's not good. And then this one is kind of like that one that I was showing you. It really doesn't have enough solder on it. This does not have enough solder on it. This one is not bad. It's a pretty good Hershey Kiss, but I burned the board. And then this one, if you can see that one on the ground pin, you can see it's really not enough solder. I melted the board, and there's not enough solder there. Okay, so this is not a complete disaster. It works, it's good enough to work, but what I would like to do is I would like to get all my joints to look like this one on the fix. That is what my goal is. So I kind of maybe deliberately didn't do a perfect job on that, because I wanted you to see good ones and bad ones. And here's another one that I just did. Let's see if I can get that in your view. And guys, I'll tell you, I am an organic farmer, and I don't go to a pedicure. I don't go for a pedicure or a manicure before I come in here. And so you are going to see maybe some dirty fingernails here, but let's see if we can get over here. Where is that? There it is. Okay. All right. So let's look here. Actually, what do you think? That one's pretty good. It's maybe a little bit globby. Got to give you something to focus on there. This one is a little bit globby. What do you see with this second one? The second one doesn't have enough solder. You see, you really don't see that Hershey Kiss. This one's got too much solder. That's globby. This one's very ugly. This one here does not have enough solder. You got 1, 2, 3 that are kind of looking like Hershey Kisses, not bad. And then this one again is very globby and round. You see that PPS one is very round and not too much like a Hershey Kiss. The third one over here is kind of a shape I would go for, but I would want to do it without burning the board so bad. This one, you see, you don't have enough solder on there. This one, this V-bat, maybe looks pretty good, a little bit globby. The 3.3 volt probably would be the winner on that one. Okay, let's look here, do a little more inspection. Hope I'm not bothering you, but it's like you're not going to get perfect ones, but you want to do as well as you can. Now, what do you see on these? Not enough solder at all. Okay, do you see those? This one works, but it's not enough solder. You barely got enough to make a connection on there. This one is almost okay. And that one, that first one, is almost okay. But overall, these were very much not enough solder on there for what you would really be aiming for. Okay, so that is what you want. That's what the solder looks like. Now, the other thing that you want is you want to make sure that you get your pins in there straight. And so I'm just going to pick up a little board here for you to look at, and I'm going to think about what is the best way to show you the board. Let's see, maybe I can show it here. I don't want to zoom in quite as much on this so you can see. Okay, so here are my pins that we're trying to solder on, and then here's a board, and we're just going to practice a little bit on this board before we go and do an actual module. Okay, so I'm going to put these in, and then what I want you to see is, you see how there's some play in these? When you solder these on, you don't want them over here. What's wrong? They're not coming out at a 90-degree angle. Or over here, they're not coming out at a 90-degree angle. You want them to come out perfectly perpendicular like that. Similarly, you've got to be very cognizant as you're going across this way that all of the pins are completely pressed in. So you see, you wouldn't want something like this where you had a gap. Okay, so you want them all the way in, and then you don't want them like this or like this. Now, this is the way that I do this. All right, so what I do is I take my pins and I come over to a breadboard and I put my pins in like this. Okay, so those are in the breadboard. Now, I could come in now and I could put the breadboard on, I could put the perf board on here like this. I think I could. Okay, there it is. I could put it on there, and then I could come in across here and I could solder those. But what would be wrong with that? What would be wrong with that would be, if you look at it like this, do you see that angle? You see, that would not be good. And also, if you look, it's hard to see, there is a gap. You see there's a gap. So there's an angle and there's a gap. Well, this is what I want you to see. This is what I want you to see. See how I have those in the board? It's kind of neat, but I think I will need to come over here. It's kind of neat, but what you'll see is that if I lay these on the side, like this, okay, you see how I've laid those on the side? And now let's look. Do you see that their side thickness is almost exactly, if I press this all the way in, which I hadn't done earlier, that will help. Okay. Now, if I look at this, their thickness on the side is almost exactly, the same as their thickness standing up. So you see this problem that I had, of these things laying over, right? These things are laying over. If I will take this on the opposite side and just put them in there laying down, now if you look at it, that is really pretty well spaced. And I wish I had a more perfect camera view for you here, but you see that's down. All of them are down, and then I would just come across here soldering. And so that would be pretty good like that. Okay, in fact, I might just try to do a few solders on this to get warmed up before we go to a real component. All right, so what do I have? I have this in here. What do I have? I've got my fan on. What do? I turn my soldering iron on. What do? I move my coffee out of the way. All right. The other thing on safety, your soldering station should not be at your eating station. Okay, your soldering station should not be at your eating station. So you need to solder somewhere that you don't eat and you don't drink. All right, so I'm using the lead-free solder, but still you don't want to be mixing chemicals with your food. And so my soldering station is not in my studio, and I'll clean the studio up after I'm done here, but I don't solder where I eat. All right, so hopefully you will keep that in mind as well. All right, now let's see. Fan is on. I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to go to this view, I think, and then I'll come over here and get completely out of your way. Now I am putting my safety glasses on, so I will be soldering with safety glasses on. And now I want to solder right here. Okay, so do you see how right here I have a pin? Okay, right here I have a pin. So I'm going to get my soldering gun. Now normally on a board, you don't want to really come in this way, because if you come in this way, you might be touching this board, this pin here. So I like to kind of arrange it. I like to arrange it something like this. Okay, I think we're ready. I think you can see pretty well. I can almost see, but it's hard for me to really see very well. My face would normally be closer to the work. I've got my goggles on, I've got my fan on, and now I am ready to try and solder. So I'm going to come in here on this one. You see I'm coming from the front. I'm trying to get that ring and that pin, and then I'm going to come in here. There it goes, and let it go like that. Boom, I got that one. Now you see that one I cheated a little more than I would like to, and I got a little bit more solder than I would want, but I just felt like that it wasn't really melting, and I didn't want to melt the board. Now I like to come to the opposite end next. I like to come to the opposite end next, and so let's see if we can get this one on. So I'm going to come down and I'm doing the pin, I'm doing the ring, and then I'm going to come in here like this. Let me get a better. Okay, like that. You see that one did a little better. You're seeing that I'm having to cheat a little bit to get it started. So I'm going to go like 1001, 1002, 1003, and then I'm going to come over here. And my biggest problem is I can't see. Now you see the problem is I have a glob of solder, and now what you're going to see is you're going to see what the purpose of that little sponge in your kit is. You've got a little sponge, and you need to have that sponge wet. All right, and then what you can come in, you can try to come in and get that solder off your tip, because you don't want a lot of solder on your tip. So you drag it across the wet sponge. Okay, so let's come back into this one. Okay, so there, we're getting it hot, we're getting it hot, we're coming in, we're coming in. And there, you see I got it to form. That one came out a little bit in front, but really those two are not terribly bad, except for the experts are going to tell me how horrible they are. Okay, let's try. I think as I come across here, maybe I'll get a little better at it. But my biggest problem is I cannot see, and you couldn't either there. I can't really see. 1001, 1002, 1003. Come in. Okay, and my biggest problem is for you to be able to see it, I've got this far enough from my face that I can't really see very well what I'm doing. Okay, come here. Let's look at that. As ugly as it is watching me do it, it's not coming out too terrible. So let me come in here. See, that one needs a little more like that. You see, I told you that I have to cheat a little bit using the solder on the tip. That you can see I am not getting those things. You know, like if I just come in and do this, it's not. That one I'm almost burning the board there. So you see I've got the glob. I've got the glob again. So I'm going to go over to my wet sponge. I'm going to see if I can get that glob off. Okay, I think I got most of it off. So now let's come back here. That one was already done. So I'll come back here. Oh, that's a big, ugly mess there. I thought I would be able to see this better than what I'm able to see it. Okay, not bad. That one might really have needed a little more solder, but I'll keep going. Okay. Okay, see I'm touching the ring and I'm touching the pin. And then like that, touching the ring and touching the pin. Like that. Okay, so let's go in and let's kind of inspect these and see how I did. One thing is I see I had not soldered on a black board yet, and that's kind of hard to see. Okay, so let's go across here. This one is almost okay, but it's kind of globby. Not enough solder, not enough solder, not enough solder, not enough as I'm getting in a hurry. Then this one is probably, that one's probably going to be one of my best ones, and I have solder mess on this pointer. Okay, so you see, this one I like. Pretty good, not enough solder. Pretty good, pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. And those first two there, not enough solder. I could probably go back and try to put a little more. Let's see if I could just dress up that first one a little bit. Now, I really think that as ugly as that was, those would probably work. Okay, and now if I look at it, I got too much solder on that one, I think. We try to do the next one over. And guys, I had no idea it was going to be this hard, but for me to get it under the camera, I'm really very far away from it with my face, so I'm a little bit doing it blind, and I did burn my finger on the solder. I was holding the solder too close. Okay, I kind of think going back and trying to add more, I'm probably not helping my cause a lot. And so these here in this region probably would need a little bit more solder, right? So you see why I want you to practice on something like this. I want you to practice on something like this, and that way when you come in and do the real, when you come in and do the real job, then you'll have a little practice. Now I'm going to try to do this. This is an Adafruit board. It is not the Ultimate GPS board because I already soldered up my Ultimate GPS boards because I needed to kind of move forward with the project before those were before I made this video, and so I soldered those. But this is a B&O 055. It's about the same size board, so it will be pretty much the same thing. And so let's come over here because I think you can see it a little better. And now what you also can see is that these pins, where did my pins go? Here they are. Okay, these pins come in long strips and you need a certain specific amount. So here I need 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to cut those with my diagonal cutters. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people just break them with their finger as well, and those flew across the room, which you always kind of hate. So let me try again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now let me do it like this time. Okay, I got 4, and now on the other side I am going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. All right, so now I have 6 and I have 4. Now these I'm going to put in over here. And so I'm going to put it in like that. And then these are going to go on that like this. Okay. Now I want to come over here, and these are going to come on this side. I need to get my actual face close to this. Okay. So now what you can see here is on the 4 side, I have 4 pins, and on the 6 side, I have 6 pins. And then I'm going to look and make sure that these are plugged in well, and so I'm going to press those down. Okay, so the pins are plugged in well, they're perpendicular, everything's square, and so now we're going to go back to that overhead view, and let's see if I can do a little bit better job this time. And again, what is so hard is I'm kind of doing it blind because I can't get my face up there close enough to really see this well. So let's try this. Okay, so I'm going to come in. I'm going to come. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, I might have bridged it there. No, that looks not too bad. But you can solder the pins together if you're not careful. So coming in. And I got to get that cleaned up. All right. That one was pretty nice. That was ugly. That was terrible. Let's see if I can get my tip cleaned off. Okay, and guys, the problem again, I had no idea how hard it was going to be to see what I was doing because my eyes are too far from this. Okay, so now let's look at those. See that last one I didn't get enough solder on. The first one was probably my best one, but I'm going to go back and try to put a little more on that last one. Okay. That looks better. Now, as ugly as it was watching me put those on, those are not too terrible. Okay, so we're going to come over here. And now not too bad. Okay, I didn't like that when I left it on the board a long time there, which is not good. Okay. Okay. So let's look at that now. Okay, you see that second one doesn't quite have enough solder, but you can see that the ring goes all the way across, so I'm not going to try to mess with it. And these over here, where are they? These over here look not too bad. All right, okay guys. All right, so safety glasses are coming off, and I'll come back in the view here. All right, so that is, I told you it was going to be ugly, okay? But normally what I do is when I'm soldering, I'll put my safety glasses on and I'll get down close where I can see what I'm doing. But I was having to solder like 3 foot out and I couldn't see where the solder gun was. And so I was kind of going a little bit blind there. And so it did not come out that beautiful. But I hope by watching me with warts and all, you can kind of at least see what the objective is. The objective is that Hershey Kiss look. And the objective is to not burn the board. And it looks like I did a pretty good job not burning the board. And there's a little singeing on there. Okay, there's a little singeing on there. But I did pretty good not burning the board, and I did pretty good getting nice solder joints. So this would be good enough. That component would work, all right? So what your homework is to get your Ultimate GPS soldered up. And like I say, given that that component is a $30 component, it would be great if you just played around with a blank perf board to begin with and kind of get your soldering technique down on something like this before you actually go in and try to jump into an expensive component like that. Okay guys, I hope this wasn't too painful for you. It was pretty painful for me to do this soldering because I could just see that I was not doing a good job because I couldn't, you know, have it under the camera where you could see it and close to my face where I could see it. And so it was a little bit like I was operating blind there, but hopefully it got you enough to where you can get the job done. And like I say, practice a lot on these little boards, and before you know it, you will be getting pretty good at it. Okay guys, I hope you're having as much fun taking these classes as I am making them. As always, at this point, I want to give a shout out to you guys who are standing with me on Patreon. It is you Patreons that enable me to continue to produce fresh quality content every single week. So I want to give you a great big thumbs up and a great big thank you. You can also help me by leaving a comment down below. That helps me with the old YouTube juice. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. When you do, make sure you ring that bell so you'll get notification when future lessons drop. And as always, share this class with other people, because the world needs more people knowing where they're going with a GPS and fewer people sitting around watching silly cat videos. Paul McWhorter with TopTechBoy.com. I will talk to you guys next week.